The heads of social media giants Facebook, Twitter, and Google on Capitol Hill today, facing off against lawmakers. They are testifying in a hearing on disinformation on their platforms. Did President Joe Biden have the power to stop construction of the border wall? The Government Accountability Office is now investigating. Some Republican Congress members say Congress already funded the project, and the president does not have the authority to cancel it. And the Pentagon approved the Department of Health and Human Services request to house unaccompanied minors in 2 Texas military facilities. This comes amid a surge in illegal border crossings. Tune in to Deep Dive as we explore these topics and more. Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. Let's kick off with big tech. The CEOs of social media giants Google, Facebook, and Twitter are meeting on Capitol Hill today. They are facing off against lawmakers in a hearing titled Disinformation Nation: Social Media's Role in Promoting Extremism and Misinformation. This comes amid growing scrutiny on what role the companies played in the misinformation around the 2020 presidential election. Democratic lawmakers are trying to draw attention to the spread of misinformation about the coronavirus pandemic and the 2020 presidential election. Human rights organization Amnesty International issued a statement ahead of the hearing. Acting Deputy Director of Amnesty Tech, Joe Westby, saying social media companies have failed to protect people from content on their platforms that incites violence or advocacy of hatred. And despite growing calls for action, users continue to be bombarded with highly targeted advertising, political messages, and propaganda. He added these companies appeal to our emotions of fear and anger to keep us staring at our screens. He notes the business model of big tech firms like Google and Facebook depends on capturing people's attention to generate ad revenue. His advice: Congress must not fall for big tech's false promises and must tackle the root causes, unaccountable algorithms, and a core business model based on invasive surveillance and profiling. Both Democrats and Republicans see removing the liability shield created by Section 230 as a way to make social media firms change their ways. Ahead of the hearing, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg argued companies such as his should not be liable for content shared by users, as long as those companies followed best practices. At stake is what's known as Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. It's a 1996 law limiting the ability of Internet platforms for content shared on their sites. In the text of his opening statement, shared Wednesday, Zuckerberg said firms such as Facebook should act to take down harmful posts. But he cautioned platforms should not be held liable if a particular piece of content evades its detection. That would be impractical for platforms with billions of posts per day. Both Democrats and Republicans see removing the liability shield created by Section 230 as a way to make social media firms change their ways. While publishers can be held liable for any content they post, social media platforms are protected by Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which states that no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. Both the Biden and Trump administrations have criticized Section 230 for different reasons. Republicans accuse big tech companies of unbalanced policing of user content on social media platforms, stifling conservative viewpoints and free speech. Democrats argue the companies aren't doing enough to counter misinformation and hate speech. And Facebook says they removed 1.3 billion fake accounts between October and December 2020. That's to combat misinformation on the platforms. Vice President of Integrity at Facebook, Guy Rosen, said in a statement, "Tackling misinformation actually requires addressing several challenges, including fake accounts, deceptive behavior, and misleading and harmful content." Adding they have a group of more than 80 independent fact-checkers who review content in more than 60 languages. And if they judge something as untrue, the content's dissemination is limited. He also noted once a label is slapped on, there's a drastic drop in clicks. He said 95% of the time people don't click to view it. Facebook claims its army of fact-checkers are independent, but where is the money coming from? One such fact-checker, Lead Stories, is partly paid through a partnership with TikTok, a social media platform run by a Chinese company that owes its allegiance to the Chinese Communist Party. TikTok came under scrutiny by U.S. officials as a national security threat. On top of that, the organization that's supposed to oversee the quality of fact-checkers is run by Pointer Institute, another TikTok partner. Lead Story says it's been contracted by ByteDance for fact-checking related work, referring to TikTok's announcement earlier last year that it has partnered with several organizations to further aid our efforts to reduce the spread of misinformation, particularly regarding the CCP virus pandemic, which originated in China and was exacerbated by the CCP regime's cover-up. Lead Stories was started in 2015 by Belgian website developer Martin Schenk, CNN veteran Alan Duke, and two lawyers from Florida and Colorado. It listed operating expenses of less than $50,000 in 2017, but had expanded sevenfold by 2019, largely because of the more than $460,000 Facebook paid it for fact-checking services in 2018 and 2019. The company took on more than a dozen staffers, about half of them CNN alumni, and became one of Facebook's most prolific fact-checking of U.S. content. Last year, the funding sources included Google, Facebook, ByteDance, and several other advertising services. Advertising brought it less than $25,000 last year. The group said the bulk of the funding still comes from Facebook. But misinformation isn't the only accusation Facebook is facing. The company is facing a $15 billion class action lawsuit alleging the firm illegally tracked the online activities of its users when they aren't on the platform. That's in violation of the Federal Wiretap Act. An earlier ruling from last year reads in part, Facebook's user profiles would allegedly reveal an individual's likes, dislikes, interests, and habits over a significant amount of time, without affording users a meaningful opportunity to control or prevent the unauthorized exploration of their private lives, saying Facebook users suffered a clear invasion of privacy. The court ruled at the time the class action lawsuit can move forward, saying the plaintiffs have sufficiently alleged a clear invasion of the historically recognized right to privacy. Therefore, plaintiffs have standing to pursue their privacy claims under the Wiretap Act, the Stored Communications Act, and the Children's Internet Protection Act. Facebook then asked the Supreme Court to appeal, but on March 22nd, the Supreme Court rejected Facebook's appeal. That means the lawsuit will move forward. Facebook then issued a statement defending itself, saying it maintained privacy standards and should not be penalized for communications that users partake in, saying that the data was collected to show users better content and more targeted ads on its platform. It has further stated the data wasn't collected in an unfair manner. They said in a legal filing, quote, Facebook was not an uninvited interloper to a communication between two separate parties. It was a direct participant. The company says it collects data when people visit websites with the firm's plugins. And now a Democratic congressman is preparing multiple bills to fight big tech monopolies. Congressman David Cicilline told Axios that big tech has a lot of money and lobbying staff in Washington ready to confront any challenge. He says the thinking in Washington favors big tech and that companies will fight to keep it that way. So he's come up with a way to break the status quo. Instead of one big antitrust law, he's aiming for 10 or more smaller bills, which he says will be ready by May. Smaller, more targeted legislation will gain bipartisan support more easily and will make it harder for big tech to respond. And those tech giants aren't the only ones in the spotlight recently. Reports reveal top Biden administration officials had previously unknown ties to tech giants. That includes the current national security advisor, who has multiple ties to Microsoft. Filings with the Office of Government Ethics show National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan served on an advisory council for Microsoft from 2017 through last year. Sullivan holds between $50,000 and $100,000 of stock in both Microsoft and Alphabet, and owns between $15,000 and $50,000 of Facebook stock. And officials said Sullivan is currently divesting himself of all of his stock holdings. Sullivan is overseeing the government's response to January cyber attacks on Microsoft Exchange email software. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki was paid at least $5,000 as a communications consultant for Lyft. Associated Press first reported on the disclosures. And now let's turn to the southern border. The Biden administration is feeling the heat. The Government Accountability Office is investigating if President Joe Biden has the power to stop construction of the border wall. Some Republican Congress members say Congress already funded the project, and the president does not have the authority to cancel it. Biden stopped construction of the border wall on the U.S.-Mexico border on his first day in office. Congress had already allocated $1.4 billion for the project. The Constitution says only Congress can allocate funds. 4 Republican senators and 60 representatives signed a letter requesting an investigation. They say Biden overstepped his authority. Now, the Government Accountability Office confirms they are investigating. Senator Roy Blunt says Biden was in Congress for a long time. He says Biden knows he is breaking the rules. Former President Donald Trump made the border wall a key campaign promise. He battled throughout his presidency to build it. Approximately 450 miles of wall are completed. Some lawmakers say the wall makes a big difference. Biden reversed several of Trump's executive orders on immigration as soon as he took office. Biden says the wall is wasteful spending. Critics say Biden's policies are fueling a surge of illegal immigration and causing a humanitarian crisis at the southern border. And for the first time in over 2 months, the press was able to access the border facilities. The Biden administration allowed a reporter and camera crew to tour a holding facility in Carrizo Springs, Texas, along with administration officials and members of Congress. Senator Ted Cruz fired back, saying the administration handpicked a TV crew to accompany their trip to the Carrizo Springs, adding that's not transparency. True transparency would be to open the Donna facility to press. That's at 1,556% capacity when 18 senators go there on Friday. And Biden announced Wednesday he has tasked Vice President Kamala Harris with tackling the immigration challenges. Biden said he had a similar assignment when he was vice president. He said at the time they got a bipartisan agreement to help countries in the Northern Triangle by giving them nearly $1 billion to help them have better living conditions. He said the best way to keep them from coming to the U.S. is by making sure they don't want to leave their own country. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham told Fox News that he is going to go down to the border with 18 senators on Friday. He says if he is not allowed to look into any place he wants, he and Republicans are going to shut the Senate down. He says the situation at the border is not Trump's fault, it's Biden's. Graham told Fox News, where are all the liberal hypocrites? Where is AOC? Where is Elizabeth Warren? Where is Vice President Harris, who basically protested outside of a facility in Homestead, Florida during the Trump years, holding migrant children? Right now, there are about 16,000 migrant children in U.S. custody. 5,000 of those are being held by Border Patrol. That's according to data from the agency. And the Pentagon approved the Department of Health and Human Services request to house unaccompanied minors in 2 Texas military facilities. Those are Joint Base San Antonio and Fort Bliss outside of El Paso. Pentagon press secretary said DoD will provide HHS officials access to these locations immediately to begin initial actions to prepare for receiving unaccompanied migrant children as soon as the preparations are complete. HHS will be covering the cost of the temporary housing. The Pentagon assures the arrangement would not affect military training and operations. But what do you think? Let me know below. Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and see you soon.